All right, so welcome to the Samson Strength Coach Collective podcast. We are joined today by Joel Reinhardt, who is the Assistant Director of Sport Performance at UMass. He works specifically with women's lax and men's soccer. I'm your host, Anthony Grasso. Welcome back. Just to give a little background on Joel before we get into it here, he's got his master's from Springfield College in strength and conditioning, got his bachelor's from St. Olaf College in kinesiology and exercise science. Give you a little bit of his journey through strength and conditioning. We've got UMass, Nicholls State, Minnesota with football and Olympic sports, Springfield as an intern and GA, Western Michigan, UConn, and total hockey. He is a certified strength and conditioning specialist through the NSCA. He also has a ton of articles, which we'll talk a little bit more about at the end of this, through sprint, jump, throw, and some other content out there that obviously would be of value to a lot of the listeners here. So Joel, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you wouldn't mind, just kind of, obviously I mentioned a bunch of places there, and what we typically like to do here is to start off by giving us a little bit of the journey that you had to travel through. Where did this whole thing start? Obviously you've occupied and been in a lot of different places, a lot of different experiences. Where did this start, and how has this kind of transitioned into the role that you are now occupying?
Yeah, as my first exposure to strength and conditioning was after my sophomore year of undergrad. I was like, 19, 20 years old. I interned. That's the total hockey one, which was the private facility that Kirk Olson owns. He was the head strength coach for the Minnesota Wild for 13 years. So it was working at that facility, but then we also did some stuff with the Wild, and then did a fair amount of, the majority of the training was training NHL guys who were from Minnesota who were home during the summer. So they'd come home to Minnesota and we were training them. So they were from all different teams. But that was my first exposure. That was great because it was basically like one-on-one. It was me and Kirk and then training guys. So I got to do a lot. And that was my first formal experience. I mean, I had experience as an athlete personally, like going through workouts and whatnot, but I played football in college. But that was the first exposure. And then that's when I definitely knew like I wanted to do this for sure. I mean, I'd always been interested in it, even back to like when I was 14, 15 years old. And then from there, Kirk, knew some of the guys at Minnesota. And so I knew like, hey, in my next internship, I want to get exposure in the college setting. And so he got me up at Minnesota. That was the summer after my junior year of undergrad. And then that was solidified. Like, all right, I definitely want to do this. And then during my senior year, I started looking at schools, and my offensive coordinator in college was a Springfield grad. So he was like, hey, if you want to do strength and conditioning, go Springfield. So he got me out there. And I think the chair of the exercise science department at St. Olaf was also a Springfield grad. So they got me out there, and I got there in the fall of 15 and interned at UConn in Olympics with Mo Butler and Joel DeMarco.
Nice.
I was at Western Michigan with Dan Nickel, and then GA'd and had football, men's and women's volleyball, and the track and field throwers. So that was a great experience. 2 years at Springfield, learned a lot, but, made even better connections of, people that I've been in group chats with since, we met at Springfield for years and years and years. So
sure.
From there, I didn't have a job when I was done with my GA. Didn't have anything lined up yet. So, but Coach Fleck and Coach Nickel had been hired away to Minnesota. And so my sister lives 5 minutes from the University of Minnesota. So I went and lived with her and just interned for them, ate training table and lived for free with my sister until I got the job at Nicholls down in Louisiana with Greg Carasquillo. I was assistant with football, and I had a couple other teams, and then was there for 2 football seasons, 1 off season, so like a year and a half, and then got up to UMass with Coach Shadid in the January of 19. So 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago now. And we've been rolling since then. I started out football only, and then pretty quickly added women's lacrosse in that spring, a few months after I got there, just because we had some reshuffling in the department. And then, so for 2 years, it was just football, women's lacrosse. And then with the most recent coaching turnover, I bumped over into Olympics, and now I have women's lacrosse and men's soccer, and we're rolling. So
nice. Yeah, that's awesome. It's a hell of a journey right there. I mean, obviously there's a lot of different experiences that you were able to obtain, variety, and obviously even just the experience of, going from, graduating and not having a job and then still continuing to intern to, like you said, just eating training table, living with your sister, trying to figure out a way to make this thing happen. I think there's a lot of strength and conditioning coaches who have a story like that, similar to yours, but you bounce around a lot here. So one thing I do want to point out, which I thought was interesting, is your experience with total hockey. Obviously you mentioned that being more of a one-on-one situation. I think that's somewhat of a unique experience that the private sector offers, I guess, in that instance. Is you can latch on to somebody who's a really high quality resource, a good mentor, somebody who can really provide that for you. Did you feel like you were able to, like, I don't know, how many years were you with total hockey? Did you feel like those years really kind of allowed you to gain a deeper understanding and maybe get into some things and understand a foundation of things that you may not have gotten if you just started off in the collegiate sector?
So I was with him for that entire summer in between my sophomore and junior year of undergrad. And then even the following summer when I was at Minnesota, I would still go back and help him out sometimes. I would help him out with like the developmental camp with the Wild when they had all the prospects in at the arena, and help him out with that. But yeah, I think it was good because, I mean, Kirk's a great guy, and I still talk with him regularly, not as much as we should, but we catch up as much as we can. But it was cool to, just get to pick his brain in that one-on-one setting. And I should say one-on-one, me and him. It was
sure
a group for maybe 10 to 15 pro guys that we would train. And then it was another group of 10 to 15, maybe 20 college, just kind of local Minnesota kids who were home from wherever they were playing in college for the summer. So it was cool because, he had a lot of experience in a team setting and was able to, kind of help me out and let me know about some of those things, and, with it being a professional setting too. And then, it was technically a, private sector setting, but we were just training pro athletes and high level college hockey players. And he really didn't like baby me early on. It was just like, all right, if it's like, this is how I want things specifically, to look, and then just go coach it up. And I don't know, it was a big thing for me early on, was just realizing that, like, if no matter who the athletes are, if you know your stuff and they can tell that you are going to be able to help them and potentially elongate their career, like, they're going to listen to you. I mean, I was 19, 20 years old, whatever it was. And had 35 plus year old NHL players who, you coach them up on something, and they're like, all right, cool. Like, they weren't, too big about it. If you knew what you're talking about and were confident about it, and, they didn't care about who the information was coming from, as long as it was going to help them, play longer and make more money. So
sure. Yeah. Right.
It was very, I mean, they're good dudes. It wasn't just like purely transactional, but it was, it was a good first kind of introduction of just like, oh, if you know your stuff, like, you can get, and are able to, communicate it in a way that they understand. And, even I was learning on the fly. So it communicating stuff like that helps me kind of do it. It helps me walk through ideas in my own head. That's why I even, like, anytime somebody asks me to be on a podcast, it's like, sure. Cause I end up, as I'm talking through an idea, I end up either realizing a leap in logic or realizing somewhere where I could I'm smoothing over some sort of inefficiency. And then I hear it out loud and I'm like, oh, that's wrong. I need to fix that. So I've, like, changed answers in the middle of answers in the middle of podcasts before. It's like, that doesn't make sense. But that was a cool first exposure. And Kirk is, a great dude, and I keep in contact with him now. And he's pretty much, he no longer is in the NHL, but he's pretty much just doing the training hockey players privately now. So.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah. I definitely appreciate the refining of thoughts as they make their way from the mind out into the world, right? And you can, like you said, you might have to just change your answer, kind of mid podcast, right? Just to kind of go through. And then I think, that's something that you bring up. Obviously you're pretty comfortable and vulnerable, right? With the idea of being vulnerable and contradicting yourself in certain ways. And I think that that's something that, as coaches, we probably need to be a little bit more comfortable with, right? The idea of it's okay to contradict yourself. Obviously it means at some point you've figured out that there may be better information out there and you change your tone on certain things. So that's really cool of you to be able to do that. And I agree. And that's why I wanted to get you on this podcast because, anybody who follows your work or is a fan of what you do, knows that obviously you got a lot of great content out there. And I think it's, time for, you to be able to put that brain and some of the thoughts that you have out into the world. So, I appreciate you being on here and doing this. Just to kind of get into, now what some of the themes that we had talked about, kind of touching on for this particular podcast. It's going to kind of go in a flow here, just for everybody listening, and hopefully we have a decent flow to it. But the idea is that there's a concept of reverse engineering sport that has definitely come about over the past few years, maybe longer, maybe shorter. I'm not really sure, but I know it's something that I've definitely taken a liking to. Obviously, with my exposure to James Smith and the Conclave, the governing dynamics of coaching, and Joel here obviously shares similar sentiments and has certainly dove pretty deep into his thoughts and trying to refine his thoughts on the topic. So Joel, I guess the question I have for you to kind of get this whole thing going is what exactly does it mean to reverse engineer sport? I feel like we're hearing it more and more now. People are writing their own books, they come with their own articles. Everyone's got to get their different concepts of how it's done. But like anything else, whenever new concepts come out and we try to take hold of it in the industry, of course, there are going to be some mistakes made. So I guess my question to you is, what do you really think of, and what does reverse engineering sport actually mean to you? And what are some of the ways for right now, before we get into it, that you think we fall short of that and have a little bit of a shortcoming in our industry?
Yeah. So actually, it's funny that you bring this up because I was working today, just kind of refining my own portfolio, my performance portfolio, and I had reverse engineering in there, and I was working on my own definition of it. So I have it as, understanding the bioenergetic, biodynamic, kinetic, and kinematic demands that the sport places on an athlete. And then, understanding how that's different within a position, across sports. And I'm guilty as anybody of switching kinetics and kinematics in my head of which one's which. But
yeah,
it's, truly understanding what, from a broad sense, what is the game requiring, just from a time standpoint. What does a typical bout look like? What does a typical, rest interval will look like? Because you can look at even a lacrosse game and it's 60 minutes. That's easy. You can say, okay, 60 minutes, it's 4 15-minute quarters now. They're switching to that this year. But obviously it's not just 15 minutes of continuous work and then a 2-minute break. It's, what I think, I forget exactly, as Charlie Francis said, watch the players, not the game.
Exactly.
To understand what the actual demands are. And so it's, you
can watch
do
the ball. Yeah. Just watch the players off the ball. Yeah.
Yeah. And you can do that through, obviously, with some of the GPS metrics and getting, some of those global, velocities and accelerations, decelerations, and then, just watching the game. And some of it can come even from just like basic film analysis of, all right, it's easier in a game like football where it's a clear delineation of what plays are. But in, flowy sports, it takes a little more looking at it, and it's easier to almost break it down by all right, we know we have, if I've got a 15-minute quarter and I know we typically get this many accelerations in a quarter, I know they're happening approximately once every however many seconds, whatever, we can kind of break it up like that. But then, the back end, because that helps you identify, the work to rest, the intensity of the bouts, kind of bioenergetics, biodynamics, looking at what actually helps athletes succeed in this, what is the end goal, depending on what the sport is, then you kind of look at strength, speed, stamina, like what does that look like in that setting? Do I need to be able to jump really high? Do I need to be able to run really fast? What is the action that actually makes me successful in this sport? And but then the back end is something that, the kinetics and the kinematics is something that you really need to watch the game, and because you're not really getting that from just kind of these global, just like, oh, you did 30 accelerations, 2 of them were in the highest band, and whatever. Like, you're not really getting to see like the different joint angles and that are being required of different positions, and some of those more the things that are harder to quantify without dartfish or like any sort of like
right.
High, like putting the film into some sort of I forget the word I'm looking for, but so you really got to watch it to and understand the game to know what typical movements are happening, and then obviously you can kind of work back from those typical movements to understand. You look at the angles and all that, just to understand the forces that are being put on the different joints, and whether it's a position that spends more time in upright sprinting or spends more time in acceleration, or there are specific cuts that happen in lacrosse that really only happen because of the constraint of trying to shield the ball from somebody else. That, like, if you try to, even if no matter how many small-sided like open agility games we did in training, if you like, the only reason they do, it's hard to like explain the actual cut. If you saw a clip of it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah. But it's like, I'm running full speed with the ball. I'm trying to like, it's almost kind of spin movie type, but they do this specific cut, and all the girls do it, but they only do it because of the way they're trying to shield the ball from the defender. And if you like, it's something where you can't even really force them to get into it. It almost feels unnatural if you're like, why would I do this cut? But it only works if you're, so that's just an example of like some movements that you wouldn't necessarily think about, but they happen in the game because of the constraints put on them. And obviously the goals of the game. So, yeah, that's the short and long of reverse engineering, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. And just so we're clear, just got to bring that home. Obviously the 4 categories you mentioned, your bioenergetic, biomotor, kinetic, and kinematic. What are some of the ways that you think, Joel, that we fall short, right? Because like the reality is, like, as coaches, we can take a look at all 4 of those categories. We can watch some film to get some context. We can take a look at specific movement patterns, specific forces, specific energy systems that are being touched on, specific qualities that we want to touch on. But I think we see it all the time. There's almost like a misinterpretation of the information that we're seeing. And I think that, there's definitely some times where that misinterpretation leads to some bad programming and bad periodization plans or whatever you want to go with. But, given those 4 categories, what are some of the ways you think we kind of fall short as an industry when it comes to, taking a look at those things? And then once you have the information, how we go about actually putting together some sort of plan of preparation?
Yeah, I would say probably the biggest area is trying to address too many of those categories with general means. And I mean, so in like the flow chart of how I think through things, it's okay, what physical qualities are needed to be successful in this sport? And identify those. And then which of those physical qualities can be built through manipulating sport environments, and not just expressed, actually like, developed, which are, different things. And so identify that. And then, okay, which of those qualities are not going to be developed through just playing the game and manipulating different environments? And so then we need to supplement those. And so there are some obvious things that fall into that category of just like, weight training, super high kind of tension, strength building. There's not an external load on the field that, we can just naturally fit into the game environment. So we do general strength training, whatever, trap bar, squats, bench, chin-ups, whatever. Because that's something you can't get. And then you look at, there are some little supportive things in there that help support whether it's just, some targeted groin work or, foot and ankle isometric type stuff. Some of that's more supportive that isn't necessarily, doing that or not isn't necessarily building any of the qualities, but it allows you to, just stay more orthopedically sound so that you can do more training to build those qualities.
Sure.
So, and then, identifying the things that are not being able to, they're not trained by just playing the sport and then training them, but, making sure you're organizing everything in a way that it fits in with the highest priority. I feel like sometimes it's like, sorry. Yeah. Sometimes it's, you just assume like, oh, lacrosse, off season is the fall. Okay. It's late August. Like we're just gonna, lift and we're going to do some acceleration work, some max V work and, some change of direction. And then we're going to lift and hit some plyos and great. Whereas, even that early in the year, we're saying, all right, what is, the number one is always the sport, no matter what time of the calendar year, that varies throughout the calendar, obviously, but we still want to start with like, at this time of year, what do we need to get done? Or what do we need to do in order to maximize us, playing in a championship game in early May? And so early in that calendar, it does involve a little more general as we start to build some of those general kind of capacities and reserves. But we're still saying and fitting in like, okay, what we got 4 hours of lacrosse work this week. We're fitting this, like we're doing this type of work here because that fits this physical quality. We're doing this type of drills here because it fits this physical quality. And matching those up so that it's, you never get too far away from the end goal, while still recognizing that there will be ebbs and flows throughout the year of, when you focus more on general, when you focus more on specific. But I would say trying to focus, bioenergetic is probably the one that is the most, especially for sports that are able to practice essentially year round. Like lacrosse, whenever we're on campus, they're practicing. Like
no doubt.
Sometimes it's 8 hours, sometimes it's 20, but and in 8 hour weeks, we supplement some extensive tempo because we only have the small amount of skill work. So we want to spend all of it on, more targeted stuff. And then we, supplement with some extensive tempo. So as soon as we get into 20-hour weeks, just go play ball. And we manipulate, work to rest ratios of drills, field sizes, number of players within those field sizes to get, kind of the outputs that we want. And so it's always going back to like, okay, what do we want to get done? Can we get it done by practicing the sport? Because then we're also furthering our technical and tactical. Because I guess even one step further, it could be like when you're reverse engineering the sport, if you're saying what makes a player good at this, I mean, what we just described is only the physical side of it. So
right.
If you're, reverse engineering the technical and tactical and psychological as well, like that's a whole different beast. So you got to be respectful of those as you work through a calendar year and not just fall into like the, whether it's a fall sport. So, you're looking at January and you're just like, all right, let's go just blast away. And there might even be times of the year where it's appropriate given the demands of the game to have no like specific skill work, and that's fine depending on the sport. But in high skill sports, it's probably smart to keep some. I mean, football is probably the most guilty of this, specifically with tackling, because you go home for Christmas break, however long it is, depending on if you made a bowl or not, and then 8 weeks of winter training where there's little to no tackling done. Andy Rowland talks about this all the time, and then you go into spring ball and it's 5 weeks, and you tackle 3 to 4 times a week for 5 weeks. It's like cool. And then you do little to none of it over an 8-week summer. And then you go into, camp and you've got the whole season. But even as you get into game weeks, you're probably only tackling a couple times a week, if maybe even one, maybe never, depending on some teams. And
or maybe every day, depending on certain teams.
But it's arguably that you can make an argument it's the most important skill. It's the most important technical skill that a defender can have. And
the major limiting factor in football, absolutely.
Depending on the position. But it's like, if you can make it, even if you don't agree with that, you got to agree that it's probably top 3 or 5. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to say it's one of your most important technical skills and you're going to work on it you're going to have 2 8 to 10 week blocks where you don't do any of it.
Sure.
If you translate that to some other sports, it sounds ridiculous. Like if our basketball team for an 8-week training block, if our guys were with TK all summer for an 8-week training block and they didn't shoot a single basketball shot, they'd be like, what are you doing? Like,
right.
Stupid. Like there are things that are so, fundamental that it's like, you should probably keep some thread of these. And it is different when it's a contact skill because it's orthopedically taxing, but there's ways you can scale it to still work on that skill. So that's, I don't know, that's an area where it's just like interesting. And we talked with Andy and a little bit, it was just like, it'd be so cool to like, people doing the contact prep. I think that's becoming more mainstream, I guess. But even within that, if you had pairing with a defensive coordinator or a linebackers coach to like build some sort of tackling curriculum that fits well into the hours you have throughout an 8-week, winter block, like just some things like that. It's not like, hey, we're going to steal 6 hours of your training or even like an hour of your training. Like,
right.
Hey, if we can fit 20-minute windows into a couple days a week, like something like that, where it's getting so far away from, never getting so far away from the specific outcomes if there's something that, require a fair amount of maintenance and are like a high skill.
No, that's a great point. I think specifically tackling is an interesting concept because, like I said, it's a major limiting factor. Open field tackling, small spaces, whatever the case is. And so in some cases, I mean, you go all winter break without tackling, and then you say you have spring ball fairly early in February. You're talking about going, or maybe you have it in March, for example, right? You're going April, May, June, July, and then August, all of a sudden you're going to start tackling again. So I do think that there is something to be said about that. And I know that you said, obviously, contact skills are obviously going to have a higher cost to some of the skills that don't require as much physical engagement. But you can also make the argument, and correct me if I'm wrong here, don't you think that given the mechanical cost that there is with tackling and contact style skills, that they are something that needs to be present more often than not to try to maintain some sort of structural integrity, or whether it be, working in a more an extensive sense? I mean, even so, like you said, the contact prep stuff I think is nice because now you're giving guys an opportunity to maybe just have, hands on shoulders, hands on hips, whatever the case is, like just feeling contact in maybe an extensive sense, moving to an intensive sense. I mean, I think like anything else, if there is a large mechanical cost to it or an orthopedic stress to it, that's pretty significant, you can make the argument that we should have some exposure to it in a graded, scaled intensity type of fashion throughout the year. Would you agree?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And even like, keeping guys, I guess, hardened to the physical cost of it while, actually working on the skill of it, and
Right.
breaking it down and, truly, identifying errors. And, we had an analyst 2 years ago who had this system of how he broke down, like there were like 6 different ways that a guy could miss a tackle, and he would have it labeled, and it was just like, whoa, like that's pretty cool. Like, and he had a curriculum, and he ended up getting hired away right before we were going to start working on it. But
that's it always works that
like
way.
That where it's like this is a big skill, and it's and it needs to be worked on. Like there are sports where, as the sport trends more towards just like pure physical output, then the length of time of year where you can get away from the specific implementation is probably longer. Like throwing is probably one. Like you could get away with not actually throwing a shot put for probably a longer amount of time than you could get away with not shooting a basketball, because you can, whether it was different med ball throws or power work in the weight room, like things like that are a little closer when it is just like a pure physical output.
Sure. Because you're saying, like, to go back to your point about the coach you were working with, given all the different various angles that an open field tackler can miss a tackle, get hit from, the different angles, whatever the case is, you think that type of variability makes it so that you can, you're not going to be able to get away from it as much. And obviously the same thing goes for shooting. Obviously you're going to be shooting from different spots on the court, different scenarios, different experiences, different shot angles. So if that is the case, and there's so much variability and chaos involved in that particular motor skill, whereas the throw is probably always going to be the throw, and there's not too much variability to it, since it's such a fine motor skill, you can probably spend a little bit more time away from that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And I'm sure there's a track coach could disagree with me, and I might be off. I haven't worked with throwers in a while, so I might be off. But yeah, it's like when the bandwidth to succeed at executing that skill in a tactical environment is so wide, like the different constraints and environments that you potentially would have to tackle somebody in, or just like angles. And the same with shooting a basketball. Like, where's the defender? Is he here? Is he there? I mean, that's why you see the discrepancy. But, Curry shoots 40% from 3 in game. And somebody at the Y can be like, oh, I just made 4 out of 10 threes. And it's like, but when when it's out of context, he shoots like 98% from 3. You see the video, he made 115 in a row in 5 minutes, just like ridiculous. So, But like when you need to be able to execute the skill in such a wide variety of potential environments, I mean, technically it's just infinite level of environments. They're never the same if you look at it from a rep without rep standpoint. But
fractals.
If you can continue to find ways to, appropriate within the time of year. So it might be a time when we need to be really, building some of the general physical capacities, but you can always find a way to be creative and fit some of the skill work in that is still furthering and not, competing with the, just kind of general physical capacities that you're trying to bring.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that answer. And that's a perfect segue into the next topic that I wanted to talk about. These 4 coactives, obviously you already mentioned it, so some might have heard you talk about the physical, the psychological, the technical, and the tactical. Anybody who knows me knows I talk pretty often about these. I think I've generally just gravitated towards them because they provide a nice and simple platform for us to at least get closer to having better conversations with sport coaches, athletic trainers, whatever the case may be. Maybe having a little bit more of a influence in the sport performance side of things, whether they're manipulating practice structure, manipulating stress, whatever the case is. But I think most of all, what I think these 4 coactives do, and giving credit to Fergus, Connolly, and Cam Joss for the work they've done on this, is I think they put us in a position as an industry where we can start to have a better filter and a better thought process for some of these shortcomings that the athlete may be having on the field, whether it's something that comes and shows itself. Obviously, it always shows up in the physical, right? But it could be a psychological, it could be a technical breakdown, it could be some sort of tactical obstacle that they're not able to overcome. I think what happens with these four coactives, though, if you kind of approach them in the right ways, you give everybody a chance at shared responsibility, you increase communication, you have a better solution-driven process as opposed to blame game kind of situation. And I think what it does also too is when you get into the specifics of how strength and conditioning coaches are evaluated, typically it's on two categories: injuries, performance, whatever, and as vague as they are. I think the four coactives themselves, if you really look at them and you look at a lot of the macro and micro principles that Fergus talks about, there's different ways to kind of filter through where some of the obstacles may be coming when it comes to injuries specifically. Say a player gets injured, it's like, well, we can go look at the film. We can take a look at whether it was a transition from offense to defense or defense to offense. We can take a look at whether it's just pure offense, pure defense. We could take a look at whether it was a decision breakdown or an execution breakdown. We could take a look at obviously the coactive that it falls under, right? And who knows, like you and the coach may have a completely different idea of what coactive it falls under or thought process, right? But without getting too deep into that, I do want to talk about those. And if you want to kind of just give your interpretation of those four coactives, and then maybe get into a little bit of how you have come to view them, the lens you look at them through. I think there was a time where data and GPS data was really the sole driver for decision-making, whereas, I think you've made it public and made it known that you believe that as coaches, we should get out in front of it, create a plan, design a plan, and then just use the GPS data to either confirm or deny whether we're actually touching on the qualities that need to be developed to satisfy these four coactives.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, the GPS doesn't, you can make some higher level like predictive models and whatnot, but, to let you know, like, all right, if we did this load, it'll get our acute to chronic in this range or, whatever. Like you can use it for that, but it doesn't make decisions for you. It just tells you what's happening or what's not. Like it is the, it's the whatever. What's speedometer? That's the word I'm looking for. Speedometer. It's the speedometer on your car that is telling you how fast you're going. And it's up to you as the driver to decide: am I okay with speeding at this point in the road, or are there cops around? Do I need to go slower? Is it snowing? Do I need to drop my speed down? Like it's just telling you how fast you're going, and it tells you how much gas you have left. And you as the driver still have to decide. And so. What was it? Oh, Patrick Ward. He's the data research analytics guy for the Seahawks. He spoke at the Catapult Ball conference last week, and he described it in a really nice way, where he's like, we have all these numbers, but part of some of these models that we have is the domain expert's opinion, and that is a tremendously important factor. So the way he described it was, when you go to change lanes, the first thing you always do is you kind of check your rearview mirror. And that gives you a pretty good sense of, the lanes behind you, what's it looking like, if it's crowded, if it's not. And that's the domain expertise. That's you being like, I know, from our sports performance side, I know the bioenergetics, I know the biodynamics, I know how to train those things. I know how to get people faster, I know how to get people stronger. Like we look at it through that lens. But then before you change lanes, you still take a glance at the side view mirror. And that's, the double check of, what are the numbers saying? Okay, cool. Now we can change lanes. And it was a cool way to describe it. It's like,
that is cool. Yeah.
And it fits well with the driver analogy too, which
no doubt.
But it's, because you can pull up numbers and just be like, okay, today was, oh, sweet. Everybody hit 90% of their max fee today. Okay, cool. Well, we didn't want that. It just tells you like, on Monday, we have a return to play girl who I had, run an extensive tempo, and went and looked at the stuff afterwards. And she had like a fair number of yards in like her 80 to 90 band. And I was like more than I wanted, I said. And I was like, so today when she had her second extensive day, I was like, hey, you need to slow down a little bit. Like, and she's a mature enough athlete. I kind of let her, she was handling it kind of on her own around some of the practice drills because she was able to be in some of the practice drills and then out. So she was fitting in the volume while I was working with another athlete. But it was, so those numbers were just saying, hey, she had 100 yards in her 80 to 90% speed band. Like that doesn't mean anything. It just, if that was a day where we wanted yards in the 80 to 90 band, cool. But we didn't on that day. So we had to adjust. The next day we wanted to hit max speed on her and she got a bunch of yards in the 90 to 95 band. Sweet. She's not quite back to the 95 band because we're getting her back from, her surgery. But yeah, it just tells you what's happening. It doesn't, you can't, and so that's where some people put the cart before the horse of like, oh, let's get the catapult or let's get the, whatever it is. Because that'll help us out. And it's like, you don't plan practices now. Like, before you should be able to answer like, what's the physical output goal of practice today? If you don't already have that answer, like what are you doing? I mean, that Kier talks about, that's a good way to like insert yourself into some of that planning is by just asking, hey, what's the physical goal of today's practice? I just want to make sure I'm matching it in the weight room. And sometimes, we have kind of our medium field, high change of direction days that are, I know we're not going to get high speed yards, but I know we're going to get a fair amount of lower to middle band accelerations, decelerations, which we have to build a pretty big base of that just because of the base of the, the nature of the sport. And then we have our bigger days where it's, we might supplement some max V prior because the sport has a implement in our hands. So we want to get some just open runs without the implement as well. And then, but if you didn't have the practice plan and the kind of the planning in front of you, when you went and looked at the data, you wouldn't know if we hit the mark or not. Because, all it tells you is if you hit the mark. It's up to you to decide what the mark is in your staff meetings and your conversations. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, and that's a great segue as well. I really want you to get into now kind of, what, like you said, you got you start to outline some of these specific themes. And I think that was the original question I posed, right? When I talked about this, it's like, all right, well, you could do it one of two ways, right? It could be like, well, I have specific themes of like physical qualities, psychological qualities, right? Like Peter said, like what's the physical emphasis on this particular drill or the physical emphasis for this particular practice? Maybe the same would go for the three other coactors. Like what's the psychological emphasis? What's the tactical emphasis? What's the technical emphasis? How can we kind of blend them? They all can't really exist per se without the physical, right? So that's why, again, they're all kind of in there and the psychological kind of feeds onto all of them as well. But you could have these themes. Maybe it's, Fergus kind of talks about having a strength oriented day, right? Where the things on the field will consist of some high change of direction, acceleration, physical combativeness. Maybe you're having a speed and power day where this field is opened up. Maybe it's, speed of, maybe not just even the speed that you're reaching, but the speed of decision making, whatever the case is, work capacity, like the themes that you're creating. So what are some of these themes? I know you touched on them a little bit there, but like, what are some of the themes that you have come up with women's lax and men's soccer and some of the ways that you have kind of, maybe you're touching on some high-low systems. Maybe you're trying to figure out weight. Maybe that's your theme. Maybe your themes are, like you said, these, moderate field kind of, high change of direction, middle ground, middle band type situations. Like what are some of those themes? And then how do you find ways to sort of, massage or adapt to what's going on the field and some of the conversations you've had?
Yeah. So our system is, I was going on my phone, pulling up our practice plan from today because you saying the psychological, it's something that I certainly don't spend enough time thinking about when like planning practices, but at the top of each of our practice plans, we have a theme, and today was small-sided / handling pressure. So, some things like that where the majority of the specifics of practice planning with women's lacrosse specifically is the lead assistant and I, and we're on the same page in terms of language of what we were looking for. So we know we have a color coded system where it's like red is like stop. It's basically, it's pretty low. There's still like full speed drills, but there's not a ton of competitive work. I guess what's the word I'm looking for? There's not a bunch of work against an opponent. Like we might do some, full speed walking, going through some scenarios, but it might not be like offense versus defense.
Okay.
But then any skill work we're doing is pretty, very small, maybe even in place. And then we have yellow days, which there's even a little bit of variation within yellow days. That's small-sided. But so any of our competitive work on a yellow day is going to be probably max a half field. And with the sport specifically, it means there's no runners coming on and off because, you can do similar to hockey. You can have like, just the free flowing substitutions. That's what I'm looking for. And usually in those scenarios, it's like 40 yards or 40 to 50 yards, just hauling ass off the field. So we see, a big spike in high speed yardage when those happen. Cause it's not like dilly dally. It's like you have to get off the field as fast as humanly possible. And then the person who's entering for you has to then get to their position way over there as fast as possible. So it ends up, that cranks up high speed yards. So if we, on a yellow day, we avoid scenarios where we have those. So even if we do have some full field stuff, it'll be a broken down drill where it's more teachy. But anything that's live will be small sided. And then we have our green days, which is like, that's go time. And in our system, we have light green and dark green. Dark green is a game. And then light green is our game like practices where we're going to get it's not necessarily always full field scrimmage. It often is. In preseason, it often is. Once we get into 2 game weeks, then it's often, it might be some full field, like transition-y just type drills where we're trying to touch on the, like, hey, we want to hit, 90 plus today. So let's get a couple of drills like that. But on those days, we want everybody to hit 90 plus of their max V, which is wherever the live, I have an intern now that's live tracking for me. So
nice.
That's clutch. So we want everybody to touch 90 plus and then, trend towards full field environments. And then if we're going to have any sort of big lift day, we'll put it on those days. So Daniel Bove's been putting out all the memes of like, lifting on game days. Like on Tuesday, we did a 3/4 scrimmage, 3/4 of a game scrimmage. And then we went in and, ripped doubles at 80% on trap bar. And the girls were like, what are we doing? But then it's like Wednesday's complete, and we talk through a lot with them about like why we're doing what we're doing. And they're great. But it, then allows Wednesday, it was just like off day, so we, that's kind of our system overall. We have our coaches have a good enough grasp on like what when we're on the same page in terms of language, that that's as far as I go. There's like the other day, it was yesterday, we were talking about next week as we go into our first game week. And I literally just I have the color coded on my, on an Excel sheet. And I just kind of turned my laptop around, and our assistant was kind of looking at it. She was like, red, yellow, green. Okay, cool. And then she just started, working on practice plans. And,
Really?
but she, I'm not going to go past that,
Sure.
The specific environments they want to work on, and they look at it from like a weekly standpoint. We know we're playing this game against this team on Saturday. We know, we're going to face this type of pressing defense, whatever it may be for that week. So we want to fit in XYZ environments throughout the week. And then I'm just kind of helping them decide which days to put those on. And then we're just very, cognizant of like, hey, we have a green practice day that is game-like. Like the next day is going to be pretty low. And we're good about that, of not having it be, outrageous, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's good. I mean, it's fun. That's as far as I go. We're color coded, and we'll have some specific conversations here or there if they have questions about a drill or how can we do this, or like, hey, we want to make sure we get some runners into this drill, whatever it may be. So, yeah. So yeah, that's as far as I go in terms of, because there are a lot more layers than small-sided versus medium versus big. There are obviously a lot more layers to it than that, but that's not my realm. So, in the specific scenarios where I can help insert some little advice, like early on in the preseason, we had this conversation where it was, we weren't playing live scrimmage on that day, but we wanted to start building, and ramping up our high-speed volumes overall. So we sat down and how can we fit the runner situation into some of these drills? And then that was our way to fit in some of that higher speed running, still within, a game-like drill. So,
yeah. Yeah, no, that's great stuff. I appreciate you outlining that for us. We're coming up on about an hour, so I do want to get into just your current role right now, and anything that you just feel particularly passionate about or stimulated by right now, whether it be certain methods or concepts you're putting into place with some of your specific athletes at UMass, whether it be women's lax or men's soccer, and if you could just kind of outline some resources for our listeners as far as books, materials, articles, podcasts, people in general, that have kind of like framed your, perspective on things and some of the things you believe in, and like where they can find like just good resources to kind of expand some of the listeners' libraries. But yeah, first, the 2-part situation here. First, just kind of talk to us about anything that you're super passionate about, any rabbit holes you've kind of dug into and gone down over the past year or two, that you're currently kind of enjoying and you want to share, and then just any sort of resources and information that you think would expand everybody else's knowledge base.
Yeah, I would say one area that I'm trying to dive into now that I've got some of that bandwidth to really dive in on some of these data projects is got expanding and being more structured with the quantitative qualities that we utilize in a return to performance setting. Part of that is some of the technology that we have available now, that we've gotten enough like accumulated longitudinal data where I've got like pre-data on, I've got months of pre-data on athletes. And even Zach Higginbotham presented at that conference as well. And he was talking through some hamstring stuff and looking at something. It was just like, all right, my structure is inadequate right now. But it's not, it wasn't necessarily anything crazy. It was just very, very structured so that, and there was no, like, I said it like this yesterday to somebody, if somebody's asking, is this person ready to come back and do X? The answer should have 2 parts. It should be whether it's yes or no. the answer should have a qualitative aspect and a quantitative aspect, because the qualitative isn't, it's not garbage. Like there's still, value to the coach's eye. But if it's, is this person ready for this drill?
Sure.
And the answer could be yes, because they are, within 5% of their pre-injury deceleration capabilities. And they are utilizing quality movement patterns to achieve those outcomes, whatever it may be.
Joel, before you go, could you just give a brief the definition of the qualitative versus the quantitative for the listeners, so that they know exactly what you're referring to and the difference between both?
Qualitative, more opinion, and then quantitative, like having hard numbers behind it. So, quantitative, hey, this person's asymmetry on the force plate is back down below 5%. Beautiful. But the qualitative on that could be they're using terrible movement strategies on the force plate.
Sure.
And their counter movement that they weren't using pre. So it could be in the opposite, or it could be, hey, their asymmetry is still kind of high, but they're back using some of those, efficient movement patterns that we were seeing beforehand. So we have faith that those quantitatives will follow in the next week or so, but the answer, Jordan Nusma has in the 8-Vector book has a little section on this. I helped him edit it. That was pretty cool. So I got to read through it a couple of times, but It was like, if somebody's asking, is this person ready for X? A, you need an answer. And then B, you should have a clear step of why are they ready for that? And it's not just like, oh, because they're 8 weeks post-op or, whatever it may be.
Right.
It's got to be, some sort of qualitative, because that's important. You're watching them move. The athlete's perception of how are they ready or not, obviously is a qualitative aspect. That's hugely important. But then the quantitative of, their isometric strength is back within a certain range, or their asymmetry on a bilateral counter movement is back within an acceptable range, something like that. And it doesn't require, even if you have the lowest technology setting, it could be, their single leg jump on their single leg, just straight counter movement on a jump mat is back within 5% of what, like it doesn't require a force plate or, catapult. Like we're lucky we have those. So I've got, we have a girl coming back from an ankle surgery right now, and she's on a torrid pace of comeback, which is fun. But I've got a little thing that is her, pre on the counter movement jump from the force plate. It's peak relative braking force, peak relative braking force, peak propulsive power, and then the couple of asymmetry metrics from those, and pre-acceleration, pre-deceleration, pre-max velocity. And then, as we kind of test her week to week, we can see how those are trending. And, I've even added a test that we don't have a pre on, but it just looks asymmetry wise at things. And but we've also got the qualitative of we're videoing everything she does and seeing, oh, she's got a little heel whip on this foot, but that's the non-surgical foot. Like maybe we should explore that, like some things like that. But having both sides of those. So especially in an environment, if it's an environment where somebody is pushing you to either be aggressive or somebody's either wanting somebody involved in the process, whether that's surgeon, PT, strength coach, sport coach, parent, like whoever is involved in the process is either pushing you too fast or being too cautious. It gives you just kind of a foundation to be like, no, you're ready for this, or no, you're not ready for this. And even so, it's hugely important for the psychological aspect with the athlete. I had a conversation last week. We had a girl, she's now pretty far removed from an ACL that was kind of way back, but she was having some kind of, post complications from where the graft site was taken out in the quad and all that. So it was, but there was just some uneasiness about, and the confidence in that leg, and being able to literally have pulled up my laptop, pulled up her force plate metrics, and was like, your asymmetry is literally 0%, whatever, 15 weeks ago, 6 months ago, it was 8, 10, which still isn't horrible, but it was like, hey, it's 0. And she was like, oh, like, cool. Like, and, that one conversation didn't flip her confidence level on its head, but it clearly, like, she was like, oh, like, wow, or even like little things. Like, we had a couple girls that like slight quad tweaks, like they didn't even miss a practice. Like, they were slightly modified in a practice, but never actually had to like sit out a day, like very mild. But a week later, being able to text them, and did it last night, texted them, hey, you hit 90 plus yesterday. So like, you saying like your quad is feeling better, like the data's backing it up. Like, you look great, like you're hitting the outputs. And it was like, oh, sweet. Like, thanks. Like, I feel like I'm getting back. Like, so it just, it doesn't replace the coaching eye. I mean, same as the catapult doesn't replace the planning of practice, but it provides checkpoints of like, and also checks you on like, oh my, I've had protocols that I thought were decent, and then you look 6 weeks later and the asymmetry hasn't really changed much. And it's like, well, maybe I need to increase volume on the surgical side, or, whatever it may be, because the asymmetry didn't change the way I wanted it to. But it's provided, I mean, it requires time and, to be able to actually dive into these things, because, it just requires man hours, but, it's been huge, because we have some scenarios where it's going to allow us to be pretty aggressive in some returns.
Yeah.
Because we'll have, we'll be able to look and say, is us being aggressive too aggressive, or are we pretty much right on track? But it's able to remove some of the uncertainty of, like, I think every performance coach and athletic trainer or PT out here, like, the first time you send that person back out into the game, whether it was an Achilles, an ACL, or just like a minor ankle sprain, like there's that but if you can remove, like, you got to analyze, like, why are you feeling like that? Like, if you truly believe that you've prepared them, then you shouldn't be feeling like that. And so having the data to back it up is nice, because it can help alleviate some of that, where Musk talked about it when he was, somebody asked, when you were watching the first SpaceX rocket that went up with human beings inside of it, he's like, were you nervous? And he was like, a little bit, but not a ton, because we had determined as a team that there was nothing more we could have done to increase our likelihood of success. And if there's nothing more to do to increase the likelihood of success, then go.
Right.
Like, yeah, there still is a 5% chance the rocket blows up on national television and kills 20 people. But we have determined through our own, professional opinions and, all, I'm sure, a ridiculous amount of data analysis that they do, that we have put this situation, this project, in the best, space to succeed. And so if we can, if I'm sending somebody out there on the field, and if somebody asks, oh, like, are you nervous? And it's like, like, that answer should be no. I mean,
right.
Maybe a little bit, because there are some, if somebody just, falls down and rolls up, there are some uncontrollables, that are just inherent in sport. But if somebody's like, oh, are you nervous? And it's like, the answer should be no, because you have so much, like, tick, tick, tick. I tick, tick, but we tick this box, we tick this box, like, and the athlete feels great. Like, even some of the qualitative boxes, like all that. So that's been a fun, and part of that has been, fostered by, we have a great athletic trainer with women's lacrosse who I work very closely with. And
nice.
We're on the same page from a language standpoint, like even similar to how it's, with the practice planning, it's, I can just kind of color code it and boom, we're filling in drills, like easy. It's the same sort of thing where we have a shared file where it's like, hey, that ankle girl, she's like, hey, go plug in what you want the days, like themes to be, and I'll plug in, like, hey, we wanted to get her on her underwater treadmill. That fits best on this day. Like, we're going to do some of her extensive change of direction stuff on these days. And then she fits in her treatment plans around that. And it just creates, this kind of synergy towards, if everybody's kind of on the same boat of, providing, it has that energy of just like pushing towards what we want to do. It creates also, a safer environment for then people to speak up if something goes wrong. Like the number of times that I've felt comfortable being like something went wrong and in a staff meeting have to be like, I screwed that up. Here's how we're going to change it. Here's how we're going to do it differently. And that's something like the specific implementation of what people see externally from what we do with that team, whether it's things that I'm putting out, things that are, official team account puts out are just straight up wins and loss record. They don't see the back end of that, of anytime something goes wrong in our program, whether that be off the field, on the field, performance, injury, anything, we have very frank meetings that are, we determine what went wrong, we determine why it went wrong, and then we determine a path forward to make sure that the things that we can control that we didn't control that made it go wrong, we control those in the future moving forward. And then we go out and we execute the plan. So it's a refreshing environment to be in, and it's a lot of fun because we have a bunch of ballers this year. So we're expected to be pretty damn good. So, because that obviously is the kicker.
Right. The talent kind of drives that bus a little bit. Well, just to support that point there, I do think, going back to what you said about, is there some sort of nerve when you send the athlete back out on the field? And I think it goes to, Taleb's point where he talks about, say you do send the athlete back out there and, he or she is recovering from X injury, right? Whether or not they re-injure themselves or have the game of their life in that moment is not the dictator as to whether it was a mistake or not for you to send them back out there, right? It's the information that you had at the time that you made the decision to send them back out there, right? And like you said, if you're adding qualitative and quantitative work together and providing some sort of justification and all of the work that you're doing to obviously put into, from a collaborative standpoint, figure out, what needs to be done, when you can push, when you can pull back, what qualities you want to develop. If you feel fully confident, then even if the athlete goes out there and God forbid has something terrible happen, doesn't necessarily mean it was a mistake to send them back out there based on the information you had and the work that was done leading up to that point. I think it's much more, obviously, and I've kind of experienced this myself at times, where it's like, there's a lot of protocols in sports med that may be solely based on, the post-op tissue recovery, right? And it's like, okay, this is supposed to happen this many weeks out, and this tissue should be fully recovered and prepared to do X exercise, whatever the case is. And obviously, as you're saying, it's much deeper than that. And I agree. And, to your last point, that ability to get into a room, I think the one thing that plagues most, college athletic departments, or whether it be specific sports or not, is the ability to not only just, obviously it's to seek success and to chase excellence. But what I think plagues is when you don't have the proper systems in place to really understand your failures and why your failures took place and how to obviously maybe erase them, or, but like put yourself in a situation where I have a system that's going to really dissect failures and really live with these failures and absorb them and try to make them, turn them into solutions. And obviously, as you alluded to, you guys have an open dialogue and a great atmosphere to obviously be able to voice your opinions, create some shared responsibility, figure out, like I was mentioning before, like filtering what went wrong, why it went wrong, like what area it may have gone wrong in, be objective about it, maybe provide some feedback, right? So that's really awesome that you guys are in a situation where you're doing that. I really enjoyed listening to you just talk about all that stuff. If you have anything more to add, obviously continue to keep going. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I did want to make sure I pointed that out. I mean, I think it's an incredible situation that you guys are set up there.
No, for sure. And even too, I posted this today. In that answer, I'm talking about, we have meetings where we go, but probably even more important is we have good enough relationships that we have so many informal interactions throughout the day. Like I put it up today. Like
saw that. Yeah.
So it's how did I word it? Like staff meetings and team meetings have their place, but organizations live and die by the quality of the informal interactions that happen in the building. And so, yes, I feel like our staff meetings end up being almost more logistically, or just like getting on the same page of like, hey, we need to get this done and this done at this time or whatever. But then like talking about when we planned practice for next week, where I was like, hey, red day, yellow day, green day. Like we did that over lunch, where I was eating my lunch and I just grabbed my laptop and I went up and sat at the table in the lacrosse office and then did that over lunch and was like, oh, she was like, sweet. I'm leaving some meeting and I have to going back to the weight room. I'm passing the lacrosse office. I always go in, like, unless I'm running off to something that I'm, pressed for time, just making a habit of like always poking my head in and just, if they're talking about something, if it's, related to the performance of our team, we end up having some sort of conversation about it, or, there's like random that happened a couple weeks ago towards the early part of preseason. I poked my head in because I was kind of thinking about something and I was just like, I think we pushed it a little too much today. I think we might have to peel back. And the lead assistant was like, from her office, which was like a door down, like yelled out, just like, oh, I feel the same way. I think we should back off. And, just like, and all of a sudden we had shifted the practice plan for the next day at like 7 p.m. And then we called the head coach and we're like, hey, we changed the practice plan. And she was like, that's fine.
That's
so
awesome.
Like just some of those, like, that wasn't a staff meeting. That wasn't but then even like if there's any moment in practice where our head coach is just kind of watching something intently, but not actively engaging with anybody at that moment, I'll always make sure go over. If I've noticed anything in that practice, about somebody, I'll, drop a little note about it, and she might, and that's usually an environment where she then is like, hey, what do you think about this and this and this, and some of the kind of macro level things that we're thinking about from a big picture standpoint as the team. And I feel like our staff meetings end up being almost just more kind of logistically of like getting on the same page with stuff. But even we operate as a staff at a pretty high level, I think. And we haven't had a staff meeting in the last 2.5, 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Like where, because the organic conversations, we haven't felt the need to have one.
Sure.
Now they have like lacrosse only staff meetings where they go over like recruiting or, some stuff like that. But like the full performance team meetings, we haven't had one in 2.5 weeks because we haven't felt the need to, because we've just had so many,
constantly working together,
informal pop-ins and all that. So, and when we feel the need to have one, we have one. But if you foster, an environment of, prioritizing those little conversations here and there and not having them, they don't always have to be work substantive. But, just prioritizing those goes a long way. So,
yeah. No, that's awesome. I appreciate that. And that's great advice, obviously, for anybody out there who's trying to figure out ways to establish connections with their sport coach or anybody else on staff, right? I mean, you guys don't feel the need to have staff meetings because you're just always working together. So it's, that's awesome. So yeah, just to wrap up here, I got the sprint jump throw stuff down here. I want to make sure that you were able to kind of plug that out there. But again, like let everybody know where they can find you, social media, some of the articles that you've put out, any of your content, in addition to any research or publications or books or podcasts or anything that you would recommend right now as far as, good reads, governing dynamics of coaching, whatever, stuff like that. Well, yeah, whatever you feel you want everybody to know about.
Yeah, the website is sprintjumpthrow.com. We've got all our podcasts are linked on there. I promise we're gonna at some point pick the podcast back up. AC moved, and then we had the coaching turnover, and it was got a little busy, so we just put that on the back burner. It was first, I was getting married in the summer, then AC switched.
Congrats!
In the fall. Yeah, thank you. And then AC switched in the fall, and then we had the coaching turnover in the winter. So it was like all of a sudden we looked back and we were like, we haven't done a podcast in like 8 months, but we'll pick that back up. We've got a bunch of articles on there. The Instagram is Sprint Jump Throw. My Instagram and Twitter. I think my Instagram is Joel H. Reinhardt. Twitter is Joel Reinhardt. I've got couple other random articles. I think I have one on Team Builder. I think I have one on Simply Faster. But yeah, if you got any follow-up questions from this, just let me know.
Yeah, it's awesome. Joel, we really appreciate it, man. I appreciate you walking us through as thoroughly as you did. This is exactly why I wanted to get you on here. We'll have to have you back. We'll have to do like a part 2 or something like that. Maybe dive into some other concepts. But again, really appreciate this. If you're good with that there, we'll end it there.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Well, we'll talk to you soon, Joel. Everybody else, thank you. Have a good night.